As Indigenous peoples marked the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation this week, they also had to confront an old problem of public figures claiming that the history of residential schools has been exaggerated or falsified. A political party in BC released a trailer for a video which called into question funding First Nations have received to locate unmarked burials on the grounds of former residential schools, with people saying that those schools didn't amount to genocide. Another instance in BC saw a Conservative Party of BC staffer who was fired earlier this week for posting to social media that the survivors' flag, which is meant to honor residential school survivors, is a disgrace and fake flag that perpetuates untruths about Canadian history. Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, took to social media to claim the residential schools genocide is a hoax. Survivors have spoken for years about denialism and the impacts that it has on communities in the process of reconciliation, and have really looked for ways to kind of tamp this down, saying that it's harming their communities, and people in some cases are showing up to sites of former residential schools with shovels, saying that they are there to excavate bodies that First Nations have really taken issue with. Historian Sean Carlton describes these instances as residential school denialism, which he characterizes as a strategy used to twist, misrepresent, and distort basic facts about these institutions to kind of shake public confidence in the stories of survivors and in the process of reconciliation that is happening in the country between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. This kind of all came to a head in 2021 after a First Nation shared preliminary findings from a ground-penetrating radar survey that found some 200 potential unmarked burials on the grounds of a former residential school in Kamloops, BC. Other survivors have talked about harassment that they faced online for failing to produce, for the so-called denialist, physical bodies of children. This is all despite there being documented evidence of First Nations children and Indigenous children largely dying in residential schools. An estimated 6,000 children died while attending these schools, although experts at the National Center for the Truth and Reconciliation are continuing to comb through millions of records, but they say that number can actually be much higher. The issue came to Ottawa last year when NDP MP Leah Gazan introduced a private member's bill to criminalize residential school denialism, but it died on the order paper when the spring election was called. Canada enacted a similar law in 2022 to combat Holocaust denialism. Gazan told me that she's still pushing for that law to move forward and that survivors are being harmed in the meantime by the onslaught of messages claiming that their suffering wasn't real, especially on a day like the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which was really meant to honor those survivors and to bring their stories forward.